I spent 27 years in uniform, most of them in country where a person could walk for 3 days without crossing a road. I learned early that wilderness is not empty. It only appears empty on maps. A blank section of paper may contain avalanche paths, mineral claims, old sheep bridges, illegal outfitter camps, unmarked graves, aircraft wreckage, abandoned telephone wire, and trails worn into the ground before the agency responsible for them existed. A ranger who mistakes blankness for absence does not last. Even so, I believed maps were honest about the shape of the land. I stopped believing that in Montana, when I transferred to the North Fork District in the spring of 1998. That is not the district's real name. The actual district has since been reorganized twice, and several of the place names I would need to use remain restricted. I will describe the country generally. It lay along the eastern side of a large national park, against a wilderness complex of steep limestone ridges, burned lodgepole benches, and glacial valleys. Snow remained above 7,000 feet into July. The rivers were cold enough to incapacitate a strong swimmer in minutes. Grizzlies moved through the lower drainages in spring, then followed the melt upward. The district staff was small. We had a superintendent who worked at headquarters, a district ranger, 2 permanent backcountry rangers, 6 seasonal rangers, a wildlife technician, a maintenance foreman, and a rotating group of fire and trail personnel. Search operations drew additional staff from the county, the Forest Service, and sometimes the Air Force Rescue Unit out of Great Falls. I came in as the backcountry district ranger. My responsibilities included patrol planning, law enforcement, campsite inspections, bear management, helicopter coordination, search and rescue support, and the supervision of 4 remote patrol cabins. I had been doing variations of that work for 14 years. I knew how to read a drainage from a contour map and estimate where a lost hiker would go when weather closed in. I knew how long a horse string needed to cover rough trail and how much aviation fuel a 10-minute hover would burn. I also knew that every district had local procedures nobody bothered to write down. That was what I assumed Management Zone 14B was. I first saw the designation on a patrol schedule during my 3rd week. The schedule had been placed in my mailbox after the Monday operations meeting. It listed my personnel assignments for the coming 10 days. 2 seasonal rangers were going up the Alder Creek Trail. 1 permanent was covering a bear closure near a campground. I had a horse patrol along the western boundary. At the bottom of the 2nd page, below the ordinary assignments, was a separate block printed in smaller type. 14-B Night Boundary Rotation, Personnel, H. Rusk/D. Vehicle U-17, Departure 21:30, Return O-4:30, Radio T. AC-6, Low Power, Objective, Maintain Perimeter Integrity, Civilian Entry Remains 0. Harlan Rusk was our maintenance foreman. Dale Vale was a senior ranger due to retire that fall. Neither man had mentioned an overnight patrol. I assumed 14B was a temporary wildlife closure. We had several places where bears concentrated around winter-killed ungulates, and the district sometimes restricted access without putting the closure on public maps. I checked the resource management binder. No 14B. I checked the fire recovery maps, archaeological sensitivity overlays, bear management units, wolf den buffers, avalanche closures, concession boundaries, grazing allotments, and administrative use, area says. Number 14-B. Our district GIS was primitive by modern standards. It ran on a workstation in a room that also held the radio repeater batteries and 2 cabinets of aerial photographs. I searched every active layer for the designation. Nothing appeared. Then I searched the file index rather than the map. That gave me 43 results. There were wildlife observations attributed to 14-B, maintenance expenditures, portable radio assignments, patrol hours summaries, aviation requests, and fuel charges. The files went back to 1981, the year the district had begun converting paper records to digital form. I opened a wildlife survey from the previous winter. It listed elk, mule deer, wolverine sign, and 2 mountain goats. Each observation had an elevation, date, weather condition, and observer code. The coordinate fields were blank. The report had been approved by our wildlife biologist. The patrol summaries were stranger. I opened 6 at random. Each contained the same sentence. Boundary secure. No civilian contact. Patrol completed normally. Different rangers had submitted them. Some were years apart. The mileage varied, as did the fuel use and hours charged. But the narrative never changed. I printed one and took it to Dale Vale. Dale was repairing a radio harness at the back desk of the equipment room. He had the deliberate way of moving that older field rangers acquire after years of bad knees and uneven ground. I set the report beside his hand. "Where is 14-B? He looked at the paper, then at me. "You've got the schedule," he said. "I've got an assignment code. That'll be enough for tonight. It's your patrol. I need to know where you're going." Dale turned the report over, face down. He was not insubordinate. He was one of the steadiest rangers I had ever supervised. That made his response more noticeable. He said, "Talk to Mercer." Tom Mercer was the district ranger. I found him in his office after lunch. His door was open, and he was reviewing a concession permit. I asked him the same question. He did not ask what I meant. He closed the permit and said, 14-B is a controlled management area. What are we controlling? Access. What kind of access? Unintentional. I told him it was absent from our maps. He said he knew. I told him 2 employees under my supervision were being sent into the backcountry at night without a route filed in the district operation plan. He corrected me. They don't enter it. Then what do they patrol? The accessible side. If visitors never enter the zone, why are we patrolling it? His answer came immediately. Because eventually, somebody always does. Mercer gave me a key and told me to arrive at the district office at 9 that evening. The key opened a narrow steel cabinet in the dispatch room. I had assumed it contained controlled drugs for wildlife immobilization. Inside were 6 canvas map cases, 4 older handheld radios, a metal cash box, and a red 3-ring binder. The binder was labeled Discontiguous Land Unit Procedures, Northern Interior Region Field Issued. Do not duplicate. Mercer stood behind me while I read. The term Discontiguous Land Unit was not defined. The first page began with entry procedures, as though anyone authorized to see the binder was already expected to understand the subject. Personnel assigned to a unit boundary were to travel in pairs. Digital navigation devices could be carried, but were not to be used as primary navigation. Compasses had to be checked against 2 fixed bearings before departure. Rangers were to record stream crossings, saddle elevations, and total travel time by hand. Place names were prohibited over the radio. Inside something called the variance margin, personnel were not to transmit coordinates, personal names, or estimated distances. Radio traffic had to use a call and response structure. The calling ranger gave the unit designation and a 2-digit number from a rotating card. Dispatch repeated the designation, but subtracted 1 from the number. If dispatch repeated the original number, the ranger was instructed to end contact and change position before transmitting again. There were procedures for trail interception, civilian redirection, temporary closure placement, and something called a route emergence. The route emergence section was short. Do not proceed beyond the first uncorroborated junction. Establish visual continuity with the nearest verified landmark. Prevent civilian use. Do not install permanent markers. Report apparent destination only after leaving the variance margin. Remove evidence of passage where practical. If the route persists after local sunrise, request geomatics review. I read the section twice. What is an uncorroborated junction? I asked. A trail junction that wasn't there on the previous patrol, Mercer said. Game trails appear all the time. Not with signs. He took one of the map cases from the cabinet. Inside was a hand-drawn topographic sheet on waterproof paper. It showed a section of the district I recognized. 2 parallel ridges divided by a north-flowing creek. The official trail passed along the western slope and crossed the creek near an old burn. On the hand-drawn sheet, the same terrain had been reproduced with one difference. Between the ridges was a second drainage. It was narrow at the south end and widened towards the north, occupying ground that should have belonged to the original creek basin. Contour lines descended into it from both ridges, without altering the ridgelines themselves. The geometry could not be reconciled. The added acreage had no source. A black line had been drawn around the second drainage. Beside it, it was written 14-B working limit only. There were no interior elevations, no waterways, no trails, no names. The area inside the line had been left white. I asked Mercer who had made the map. He said, Geomatics. We don't have a geomatics office. Not at district level. Dale and Harlan arrived at 21:15. They wore standard patrol uniforms under dark green field jackets. Both carried overnight packs, although the schedule called for a 7-hour vehicle patrol. Dale handed me a compass. Check it off the flagpole and the repeater mast. I did. The bearings were correct. Before we left, Harlan removed the GPS unit from vehicle U-17 and locked it in the steel cabinet. I asked why. He said, because you won't like what it tells you. We drove 38 miles on paved road, then another 11 on a gated administrative track. The night was clear. There was no moon. At that elevation, the temperature had fallen below freezing, though it was late June. Dale drove. Harlan sat in the rear with the packs and 2 rolled closure signs. At 22:48, we stopped where the maintenance road ended at an old fire break. According to the official district map, we were 6 miles from the nearest trail and 9 from the park boundary. Dale recorded the odometer reading on a paper form. Harlan checked his watch against mine. The difference was 3 seconds. He asked me to reset mine. That was the first procedure that made me uneasy. Wilderness work depends on approximation. Rivers rise, trails wash out, aircraft arrive late, and weather ignores schedules. A 3-second difference has no ordinary operational significance. We walked north. The route was not difficult. We followed a low ridge through lodgepole pine, crossed a dry swale, then climbed toward a limestone outcrop. Dale stopped at intervals to take bearings. Harlan recorded them without comment. After about 40 minutes, I noticed old axe blazes on the trees. They were not trail markers. The cuts were at ankle height, facing away from our direction of travel. Some had nearly healed over. The oldest could have dated to the 1930s. I asked Dale about them. "Rear marks," he said. "For finding the route back?" "For confirming there is a back." He did not elaborate. At 2341, we reached the limestone outcrop. A metal survey pin had been set into the rock. It carried no agency stamp, only the number 14. Beyond it, the ridge descended gradually through open timber. Dale told me we had reached the variance margin. Nothing looked unusual. That fact remains important. There was no sudden silence, no unnatural cold, no sensation of being watched. The country smelled of pine bark and damp soil. I could hear water somewhere below us. A small animal moved through the brush and stopped. Harlan switched his radio to TAC-6. 14B, Field 1, check 24. A dispatcher I did not recognize answered. 14B, check 23. Harlan looked at Dale. Dale nodded. We continued. The first sign of a route emergence was a cut log. It lay beside a narrow trail that joined our line from the east. The log had been cleared with a crosscut saw. The ends were clean and pale, no more than a week old. No authorized trail crew had worked in that part of the district. I reviewed their schedules myself. The trail was roughly 3 feet wide. It had a stable tread, drainage dips, and trimmed vegetation. It did not resemble an animal path. Someone had built it according to federal backcountry standards. 20 yards past the junction stood a wooden sign. It was mounted on a peeled cedar post and routed in the standard Park Service style. East Basin, 4.2 Miller Pass, 9.8. Neither place existed in our district. The sign looked old. Lichen covered one corner. The post had weathered silver. Dale photographed it with a 35mm camera. Harlan measured the trail width and noted the species of the cut log. I stepped close enough to inspect the routing. The sign had been made by somebody familiar with our sign shop. The letter depth, arrow shape, and spacing followed specifications adopted in 1966 and discontinued in 1984. I said it could have been stolen and installed as a prank. Neither man argued with me. Harlan took one of the closure signs from his pack. It said the trail was closed because of hazardous conditions. He did not place it at the junction. Instead, he carried it 50 yards back and installed it where a person approaching from our side would see it before seeing the new trail. That placement bothered me more than the sign. "You're hiding the junction," I said. "Yes." "From whom?" "Anyone coming through here tomorrow." "Why not remove the sign?" Dale looked east, down the new trail. "Because sometimes removal counts as maintenance." I thought he was joking. He was not. We did not follow the trail. Dale scraped loose duff across the first 20 feet and dragged a dead branch over the tread. Harlan took another radio reading. Then we moved north, parallel to a boundary I could not see. At 0112, we found boot prints. They came up a slope from the west, crossed our route, and continued east. There was one person, probably an adult male, wearing a common lug-soled hiking boot. The impressions were sharply defined. The soil was damp beneath the surface, and I estimated they were less than 12 hours old. Dale crouched beside them. "No outbound heel," he said. He was right. A person walking uphill plants the front of the foot more strongly. A person descending leaves a deeper heel strike. These tracks looked uphill in both directions. The western prints indicated someone climbing toward us. The eastern prints also indicated someone climbing away. There was no crest between them. Harlan radioed dispatch. 14B, Field 1, I have one lateral crossing. Category 2, no contact. 14B, confirm no contact. Civilian contact 0. Maintain. I asked what Category 2 meant. Dale said, evidence without a subject. What is Category 1? Subject without evidence. I asked what Category 3 was. Neither man answered. We returned to the vehicle at 03:58. The walk back took 26 minutes longer than the walk in, though we followed the same bearings and did not stop. My watch had lost 11 minutes against Harlan's. Dale's had gained 4. Vehicle U-17's odometer showed 6 additional miles. The truck had not moved. 4. The following morning, I started looking through the district records. At first, I did it as part of my job. 2 employees under my authority had been assigned to a restricted area under procedures I had never seen. I had a legal and professional responsibility to understand the risks. That was how I justified it. The fuel records went back to 1959. Before 14B acquired its current designation, expenses had been charged to Special Patrol Tract N, then Unsurveyed Watershed Reserve, then Interior Management Parcel 6. The names changed, but the weekly fuel allocation remained remarkably consistent. The district had spent enough over 4 decades to support thousands of patrol hours. The staffing rosters were even older. I found copies on microfilm showing seasonal riders assigned to Parcel 6 in 1941. During the war years when park staffing had been reduced, the assignment continued under a civilian public service work detail. In 1932, it was listed as a forestry inspection. In 1911, it appeared in a ledger maintained by the Department of the Interior's General Land Office. The earliest document I found was an 1894 memorandum from a federal timber agent. It referred to the additional north-running watershed not represented upon the survey plat, and recommended that no homestead, grazing, or mineral entries be accepted within 1 day's travel of its seasonal mouth. The timber agent had underlined seasonal mouth. A handwritten note in the margin read, not seasonal, positional. I checked the topographic maps next. The district kept additions going back to the first formal survey. I laid them out by year on the conference table and compared the contour lines. At a glance, they looked consistent. When I used transparent overlays, small discrepancies appeared. A creek shifted half a mile east between the 1937 and 1952 additions. A ridge gained a saddle in 1969, then lost it in 1974. A 1986 map showed an unnamed pond at the head of a dry drainage. The next edition removed the pond but extended the drainage by 3 miles. The total mapped acreage of the park remained constant in every edition. That required adjustments elsewhere. Whenever additional ground appeared near the working limit of 14B, an equivalent amount disappeared along another boundary. Usually the subtraction occurred in steep, inaccessible terrain, where few people would notice a contour moving. The maps were not documenting the changes. They were balancing them. Our GIS files contained the same practice in digital form. I found a locked layer called aerial reconciliation. It did attach to each section of the district. Most values were 0. The sections around 14B carried corresponding positive values. The file had been updated every year since 1983 by an office identified only as the Land Baseline section. No such office appeared in the regional directory. I called the GIS coordinator at regional headquarters and asked about it. There was a pause long enough for me to hear him close his office door. Then he said, "That isn't an active layer. I opened it this morning. You should close it." "Who is the Land Baseline section?" "I don't have a contact for them." "Who updates the file?" He repeated that he did not have a contact. Before hanging up, he said, "Don't print the geometry." I already had. That afternoon the printer jammed. When I opened the service panel, I found the 14B map folded inside, although the page had emerged normally and was lying on my desk. The folded copy was warm. I did not mention that to Mercer. It was the first fact I could not fit into an administrative explanation, and I distrusted it for that reason. Equipment malfunctions. People become tired. Memory changes to protect whatever conclusion has already been reached. I put both copies in separate envelopes. The next morning, the copy from my desk showed the working limit where I had seen it. The folded copy showed the same boundary, 9 miles south. 5. The aviation records provided the clearest evidence that 14B was not merely a paper designation. Helicopters had supported the patrol since 1963. Flight invoices referred to radio maintenance, wildlife surveys, emergency resupply, and watershed photography. None listed 14B as a destination, but the flight time totals were consistently higher than the routes required. I compared pilot logs with fuel use. A direct flight from district headquarters to the Northern Patrol cabin took 26 minutes in calm conditions. Flights passing west of 14B averaged 34 minutes. That was not because of terrain. The western route crossed lower passes. I obtained old flight strips from the contractor. Every pilot had made the same unexplained dogleg around an empty section of airspace. The turn points did not appear in the park's aviation hazard plan. They did appear in a supplemental packet kept in the locked cabinet. The packet instructed pilots to avoid the vertical projection of any active working limit. If overflight became unavoidable, the pilot was to maintain visual contact with the horizon and disregard ground-referenced navigation until clear. The phrase vertical projection had been added in 1987. An earlier version said simply, "Do not fly above it." I asked one of our contract pilots, a woman named Ellen Sayer, whether she knew why. She had flown mountain operations for 19 years. She was not easily unsettled. She told me she had crossed the area once during a medical evacuation in 1982. Cloud had closed the usual route, and a patient with internal bleeding could not wait. For 7 minutes, her airspeed indicator showed 110 knots, while the helicopter's position relative to the ground did not change. The compass rotated through 2 full circles. The altimeter indicated a climb of 3,000 feet, but the torque and rate of climb instruments remained level. She could see trees below her. She said they were not moving in the rotor wash. Then she saw another helicopter beneath them. It had the same paint scheme and registration number as hers. "I didn't see people," she told me. "I saw the top of the aircraft. I was above it, and it was above me. She kept flying on the sun until the instruments returned. The medical evacuation reached the hospital 18 minutes earlier than flight time should have allowed. Ellen reported the incident. The regional aviation office removed her from duty for 2 weeks, inspected the aircraft, then required her to sign an amended flight record attributing the readings to magnetic interference. After that, she said, they gave me the dogleg coordinates. I asked whether she believed 14B was a place. She considered that. I believe it has edges, she said. The satellite imagery was less direct. Every annual image set contained usable coverage of the district. Resolution improved over time, from grainy black and white photographs to detailed multispectral files. In each set, the area around 14B was obscured differently. Sometimes there was cloud, sometimes smoke. One image had a striping artifact attributed to sensor failure. Another showed a snowfield under August conditions. A 1995 image appeared clear until I compared shadows. The sun angle inside the working limit differed from the rest of the photograph by nearly 40 degrees. The imagery contractor's quality control forms marked every file acceptable. The invoices included an item called Regional Seam Accommodation. It cost more than the imagery itself. 6 wildlife crossed the working limit more often than people did. At least that was what the reports claimed. The district had collared elk, wolves, mountain goats, and grizzly bears as part of different studies. The tracking data showed animals approaching 14B, disappearing from reception, then returning. The loss periods ranged from minutes to months. An elk cow entered the margin in October 1989 and reappeared 42 miles north the following April. Her caller recorded 6 hours of elapsed time. A wolf disappeared for 11 days and returned to the same location with its stomach full. Blood analysis showed it had eaten an ungulate, but hair recovered from the scat could not be assigned to any regional species. There was no suggestion of a new animal. The lab identified elk characteristics, deer characteristics, and bovine proteins in the same sample without finding a usable genetic profile. The most carefully documented case involved a grizzly known as Female 71. Her caller stopped transmitting near 14B in September 1992. 4 months later, a maintenance employee found it hanging from an old survey tripod outside the southern working limit. The collar had not been cut or damaged. The buckle remained fastened at the circumference used on the bear's neck. There was no blood or hair. Tripod outside the southern working limit. The collar had not been cut or damaged. The buckle remained fastened at the circumference used on the bear's neck. There was no blood or hair. Female 71 was photographed the following spring near the Canadian border. She was alive and appeared healthy. A rectangular patch of fur around her neck had turned white. The wildlife reports used a phrase I began seeing elsewhere. Biological return confirmed. Continuity undetermined. I asked the wildlife biologist, Peter Arlen, what it meant. He removed his glasses and cleaned them for a long time. Then he said, "It means we got the animal back." Is it the same animal? It had the same ear tags. That wasn't my question. He put his glasses on again. It was the answer I was authorized to give. The search and rescue files were harder to access. Mercer initially refused. I reminded him that I was responsible for field deployment and needed to know whether the zone presented a risk to search personnel. He sent a request through regional headquarters. 3 days later, a woman named Ruth Avon called me from the Office of Special Land Conditions. The name did not appear in any department of the Interior Directory I could find. Avon did not identify her title. She asked why I wanted the records. I gave her the operational reason. She asked whether I had experienced a root emergence. I said yes. Did you enter it? No. Did you want to? That was not an operational question. I told her so. She said, "Desire to complete a route is a recognized exposure indicator." I wanted to know where it went. "Yes," she said, "that's the indicator." The next morning, a locked courier case arrived from Denver. The combination came by separate fax. Inside were 28 search files dating from 1926 to 1996. Every search had intersected 14B. Some involved ordinary missing hikers who were never found. Others had outcomes that could not be reconciled with distance or time. In 1958, 2 brothers disappeared from a lakeside campsite. One was found the next morning on a trail 60 miles away. His clothes were dried despite overnight rain. He insisted his brother was walking several hundred yards behind him. Searchers never found the second boy. In 1973, a seasonal ranger named Louise Carr vanished while investigating smoke near the working limit. 3 days later, she radioed from a patrol cabin and requested breakfast. The cabin was 31 trail miles from her last known position. Snow had blocked both passes. When questioned, she said she had been gone for 40 minutes. The file contained medical evaluations, interview transcripts, and photographs. Carr appeared physically healthy. Her watch had advanced 43 minutes. She had 3 days of beard-like frost abrasion on one cheek, though she had encountered no reported wind. She returned to duty. For the next 9 years, she patrolled 14B more frequently than any other ranger. In 1982, she disappeared again. This time she did not return. Her personnel file listed her as transferred to the Land Baseline section. The most recent search had occurred 2 years before my arrival. A family of 4 reported seeing an official trail sign near a popular backcountry lake. The sign pointed toward a place called East Basin, the same name I had seen on the route emergence. They followed the trail for approximately an hour, became concerned, and turned around. They reached the lake 13 hours later from the opposite direction. The father said they had passed 3 ranger cabins. No cabins existed in that drainage. His 11-year-old daughter claimed one of the cabins was occupied by a female ranger who watched them from a window, but did not open the door. The girl later identified Louise Carr from a set of employee photographs. Carr had been missing for 14 years. The report's final determination read, civilian entry, 4, civilian return, 4, perimeter failure not repeated. Someone had crossed out the first number and replaced it with 0. 7. By August, I was not sleeping normally. I would wake before dawn with the conviction that I had forgotten a trail, not a task or an appointment, a physical trail. I began drawing the district from memory at my kitchen table. I could reproduce every major drainage, ridge, patrol cabin, bridge, campsite, and pass. Yet each time I finished, the proportions around 14B were wrong. There was either too much room or not enough. I measured my drawings. The error moved. Some nights it appeared near the northern boundary. Other nights, it opened between 2 creeks I had personally crossed many times. I stopped hanging district maps in my house. At work, I continued the investigation. The maintenance schedules showed annual service for 3 structures inside 14. B. Gauge House, 2-line shelter. C. Reference, Mast 14. Harlan Rusk signed the completion forms. I asked how he maintained structures inside a zone nobody entered. He said, "We maintain their availability." That doesn't mean anything. It means we take supplies to the closest stable point. If the structure is there, we do the work. And if it isn't, we bring the supplies back. I asked how often the structures were there. Not often anymore. Where do they go? Harlan looked at me with genuine surprise. They don't go anywhere, he said. We do. In September, I found Gauge House 2. It appeared during a helicopter survey after an early snow. Ellen Sayer was flying. We were counting mountain goats along a limestone escarpment well outside the known working limit. I saw a green roof below us. The structure stood in a narrow meadow beside a creek. It was a standard government gauge house, perhaps 12 feet square, with white walls and dark green trim. There was no meadow on our map. I asked Ellen to circle. She refused. "I can set down north of it," she said. The landing site was nearly 2 miles away. I went on foot with Peter Arlen and another ranger. The first mile followed known terrain. We crossed an avalanche chute and descended through subalpine fir. The gauge house should have been directly below us. It was not. Instead, we came to a maintained trail. Fresh snow covered the tread except for a single set of tracks. They belonged to me. I recognized the worn outer heel of my left boot and the diagonal cut on the right sole. The tracks approached from the south, passed in front of us, and continued north. They did not match the prints I had just made behind me. Those were visible, too. Peter stared at them without speaking. The other ranger asked whether we should report a second party. I told him no. I did not explain. We followed the older tracks north. After 200 yards, they turned east at a wooden sign. Gauge House 2, 0.4, East Basin, 6.1. The tracks continued toward the gauge house. We did not. I had read enough by then to recognize what the zone did with professional confidence. It gave us things we knew how to follow. A trail worker would follow cut tread. A biologist would follow an animal collar. A pilot would follow instruments. A search team would follow footprints. A ranger would follow evidence of himself. We withdrew along our own tracks and reached the helicopter without incident. That evening I made my first unauthorized call to a retired ranger. His name was Albert Sen. He had worked the district from 1954 until 1979 and had signed more than 214 B patrol reports. He lived in Arizona. When I mentioned the designation, he told me I had the wrong number and hung up. I called again. This time I asked about East Basin. He remained silent. Then he said, "Has it started putting up signs again?" I said yes. "Then your limit is too tight." "What does that mean?" "You're treating it like land you can surround." "Isn't it?" "No." "What is it?" He breathed into the phone for several seconds. Then he said, "It's a way of arranging land." I asked him why the Park Service protected it. "We didn't," he said. "We protected everything else." Before I could ask another question, he continued, "You think those patrols keep people from going in? That's the language they use for new staff. It isn't exactly false. What are they really for? To see what came out." The line went dead. Sen died 12 days later. I learned of his death from a forestry memorandum routed to Mercer. It contained no obituary and no explanation. It simply instructed the district to discontinue Sen's retirement contact authorization and review the Southern Working Limit. 8. The first Category 3 incident of my tenure began with a missing backpack. On September 17th, 2 visitors hiked to a backcountry lake and established camp at a designated site. At approximately 1600, one of them left to collect water. When he returned, his companion was gone. The missing visitor was a 26-year-old graduate student named Evan Ross. His boots and rain jacket were missing. His sleeping bag, food, and permit remained in the tent. The companion reported no argument, medical problem, or reason Ross might leave. At 17:30, the first ranger reached the campsite. At 18:12, she found a trail junction 50 yards east of the lake. It was not present on her morning patrol. The junction had a wooden sign, East Basin, 3 cents. She did exactly what she had been trained to do during an ordinary missing person incident. She followed it. Her last normal transmission came at 18:26. After that, dispatch received her call sign on 3 frequencies at once. One signal came from the lake. One came from a repeater 40 miles north. The third used TAC-6 and gave the proper 14-B call and response code. She had never been issued that code. Mercer called me at home. By the time I reached the office, a search was already developing. County deputies were on the road. A dog team had been requested. The missing visitor's family had been notified. Ruth Avon was on the secure telephone. She instructed us to classify the operation as a hazardous trail closure rather than a search. I refused. We have 2 missing people. You have 1 civilian entry and 1 staff deviation. I have 2 human beings unaccounted for. The distinction matters operationally. Not to me. There was a pause. Avon said, "If you put conventional search resources across that junction, you may increase the return count without increasing recoveries." It was the first time anyone in authority admitted what they feared. Not loss, return. I asked what a Category 3 incident was. She said, "A route that remains connected at both ends." Connected to what? We don't know. Then how do you know it has 2 ends? Because traffic becomes bidirectional. At 2010, a remote weather station 23 miles south of the lake transmitted a manual observation on an obsolete frequency. The speaker identified herself using the missing ranger's call sign. She reported light snow, calm wind, and 2 civilians approaching from the north. Only 1 civilian was missing. Avon ordered the lake evacuated and the trail closed at its public junction. Helicopters were grounded from overflight. Every ranger assigned to the perimeter received a paper map with a different working limit. Mine showed 14B touching the lake. Dale Vale came out of retirement that night. No one called him. He arrived at the district office wearing his old field jacket and carrying the red binder's predecessor, a canvas-bound manual dated 1961. He opened it to a page titled Exterior Displacement Response. The procedure was blunt. If an internal route appeared outside the working limit, personnel were to locate the furthest stable intersection, sever the visible tread, and prevent continued passage until the route withdrew or became geographically consistent. Human recovery was secondary. Dale said, "That's why they use 0. I knew what he meant. 0 was not a goal. It was a measurement. The system did not distinguish between someone who intentionally violated a closure and someone who followed an official-looking sign. It counted civilian entry, because every entry gave the route another connection to established geography. A trail was not only a path through land, it was an agreement about what connected to what. Enough feet could make that agreement real. We deployed at 21:30. Dale, Harlan, Peter, and I approached from the south. 2 other teams established closure points west and north. Dispatch moved to TAC-6 and stopped using personal call signs. At 23:05, we reached the lake. Ross's companion had been evacuated. The tent remained. Snow had begun falling, light enough that the ground still showed through. The new trail was obvious. It left the designated campsite between 2 trees I had known for years. Its tread was dry. No snow had accumulated on it. The wooden sign was gone. In its place stood a steel permit box. Inside were 17 backcountry permits. Most were blank. 3 carried names: Evan Ross, Lena Ortiz, the missing ranger, and Louise Carr. Ross's permit listed his correct address and emergency contact. His destination was East Basin. His entry date was September 17th, 1998. His exit date was September 14th, 1998. Ortiz's permit carried the same reversed dates. Carr's was dated September 1982. The paper was dry and new. Dale closed the box. "We don't take those," he said. "I took Ross's permit. That was an intentional violation of procedure. I still have no regret about it." We advanced past the first junction because I believed the permit might establish direction. I also believed a search organization that abandoned people to preserve its records had ceased to deserve obedience. For the first half-mile, the route climbed gently through familiar forest. Then the land stopped, agreeing with the map. The trail crossed the same creek 3 times, always in the same direction. Water flowed left to right at each crossing. We did not turn. We passed a burned stand of lodgepole. 10 minutes later, we passed it again from the opposite side. The same trunks leaned at the same angles, but our compass still indicated north. At 0018, dispatch called. 14B, check 19, Dale answered. 14B, check 18. Dispatch repeated. 14B, check 19. We stopped. The procedure required us to break contact and change position. Before Dale could switch off the radio, another voice transmitted. It was mine. The voice said, "I have Ross. Return route secure." I had not spoken. Harlan removed my radio from its harness and shut it down. No one commented. We left the trail and moved upslope on a compass bearing. After 80 yards, we came back to the trail from below. The slope had not curved. At 0042, we saw lights through the trees. There were 3 structures in a meadow: Gage House 2, Line Shelter C, and a ranger cabin built to a design abandoned before the Second World War. A metal mast rose behind them. All 3 structures appeared maintained. Smoke came from the cabin chimney. A government pickup was parked beside the Gage House. Its paint scheme dated to the 1970s. The driver's door carried our district identification. Dale said, "This is as far as I go." "Have you been here before?" "Once." "What came back with you?" He did not answer. The cabin door opened. Lena Ortiz stepped onto the porch. She wore her uniform and pack. She appeared uninjured. A man stood behind her. I recognized Evan Ross from the driver's license photograph in the search file. Behind Ross was a second woman in a ranger uniform. She was in her 60s, perhaps older. Her hair was gray. The nameplate above her pocket read, KR. Louise Carr had been 34 when she disappeared. The woman on the porch was the age Carr would have been in 1998. Ortiz called my name. Dale told me not to answer. She called again and said Ross needed medical attention. Ross appeared steady on his feet. I saw no blood, no torn clothing, no sign of injury. He stared past us as though expecting someone else. Then another man stepped onto the porch. He was wearing my jacket. I could not see his face clearly. I did not need to. The frayed reflective strip on the chest matched mine. So did the fold of the district map in the upper pocket. Harlan whispered, Category 3. I understood then that Category 3 did not mean a worse form of evidence. It meant there was now an outbound subject. The danger was not that 14B contained copies of people. I do not know that it did. The person on the porch may have been me at another time, or an arrangement of distance that allowed me to see myself from a direction that should not have existed. The danger was simpler. One of us could leave by the wrong route. If that happened, the Park Service might have no reliable way to determine which one had returned. Dale took a red marine flare from his pack. Permanent markers were prohibited because they created durable relationships between the zone and the surrounding land. Temporary light was permitted. He struck the flare. The meadow changed. It did not disappear. It lost depth. The cabin, gauge house, mast, and people on the porch seemed to occupy the same narrow plane, like an image seen at a severe angle. The trail behind us split into several parallel treads. Ortiz shouted. This time I answered. I told her to move toward the light and not toward my voice. Dale swore at me. Ortiz grabbed Ross's arm. They came off the porch. Carr did not move. The man wearing my jacket stepped down behind them. I moved the flare from side to side. Their shadows shifted in different directions. Ortiz and Ross cast shadows toward us. The other man's shadow fell toward the cabin. I told Ortiz to follow her shadow. It was not in any manual. It was the only distinction I could see. They crossed the meadow slowly. At one point, Ross appeared to be walking away while growing closer. Ortiz kept hold of him. The man in my jacket followed. When he reached the edge of the flare light, I saw his face. It was mine, but not as it appeared then. It was older. A pale scar crossed the left side of his jaw. I had no such scar at the time. He looked directly at me and said, "Don't move the boundary south." Then the flare went out. Dale pulled me backward. Harlan activated a line of magnesium trail charges laid behind us. The charges were normally used to break rock and remove dangerous stumps. In that narrow corridor, they blew soil, roots, and cut logs across the tread. The trail did not close. It withdrew. That is the only accurate word I have. The ground ahead of us lengthened without moving. The meadow became farther away. The buildings diminished. Ortiz and Ross were suddenly on our side of the damaged tread, both on their knees. The cabin remained visible for several seconds. Louise Carr stood on the porch. She raised one hand. Then ordinary forest occupied the space. 9, we returned to the lake at 0411. The trail junction was gone. Search personnel found no evidence of our passage beyond a patch of disturbed soil 50 yards from the campsite. Our watches differed by less than a minute. According to dispatch, we had been out of radio contact for 23 minutes. Ross believed he had spent 2 days in East Basin. Ortiz believed she had spent 6 hours. She remembered finding Ross near a ranger cabin. She remembered an older woman giving them water. She did not remember seeing me, Dale, Harlan, or Peter. Ross underwent medical evaluation. He was dehydrated and had lost nearly 6 pounds, which supported his estimate rather than ours. He refused to discuss the cabin after his second interview. The official incident report classified the event as a temporary trail disorientation caused by early season snow and navigational error. The Park Service paid for Ross's medical care under a confidential settlement. Ortiz transferred out of the district the following spring. She remained with the agency and eventually became a superintendent. As far as I know, she never again entered designated wilderness. Dale died in 2007. Harlan retired in 2003. Peter left wildlife management and taught high school biology. The permit I took from the box disappeared from my locked desk before the end of the week. The envelope remained. Inside it was a district map. A new scar appeared on the map's southern margin, a narrow white corridor running from 14B towards the lake. After the incident, the working limit was moved north. That contradicted the warning given by the older version of me. I argued against the change, though I could not explain why without describing what I had seen. Ruth Haven listened and said, "Field equivalents are not considered advisory." That was the institution's term for the man on the porch. Not copy. Not double. Not future self. Field equivalent. The wording denied identity without denying resemblance. I asked whether anyone had ever brought one out. Haven said, "Not knowingly." I asked whether 14B produced them. She corrected me. "We have no evidence the unit produces anything." Then where do they come from? From roots. That distinction stayed with me. The Park Service had spent a century describing 14B as an area because land agencies know how to administer areas. Areas can be closed, budgeted, patrolled, photographed, and assigned staff. But 14B was not an area. It was a changing set of connections. The white interior on the maps did not represent unknown land. It represented land that could not be assigned a stable relationship to the country around it. East Basin may have existed somewhere. Gage House, too, may have stood in a real meadow. Louise Carr may have spent 16 years living and working at a cabin that could be reached from our district only on certain nights. The impossible part was not any individual place. It was that the route between places could appear without accounting for the distance. That was what occasionally left the zone. Not a person, not an animal, a route, a way in. 10. I accepted responsibility for the 14B patrol program in 2001. I did not do it because I approved of the secrecy. I did it because I had seen what happened when a trail appeared beside a public campsite, and I no longer trusted anyone who regarded that as an abstract administrative problem. I changed several procedures. I required route emergence training for all permanent backcountry staff, though I disguised it as navigational variance training. I placed ordinary hazard closures around the district, in patterns that allowed us to close access quickly without explanation. I ordered trail crews to report signs they had not installed and fresh maintenance outside their work plans. I also ended the use of identical patrol narratives. If we were going to participate in concealment, I wanted the internal record to remain honest. Rangers documented weather, bearings, route conditions, wildlife, and any visible changes. We kept 2 sets of records, the official reports, and a handwritten field ledger locked in the steel cabinet. The official reports continued to say, boundary secure, no civilian contact, patrol completed normally. The ledger did not. It recorded 21 route emergencies between 2001 and 2012. Most were short. A trail appeared, remained for a few hours, then ended at an ordinary creek or cliff. We obscured the junction and redirected visitors. 3 reached established trails. 1 appeared as a maintenance road complete with tire tracks and culverts. Vehicle GPS logs showed 2 district trucks, using it before we discovered that neither driver remembered doing so. The fuel records confirmed the mileage. 1 route emerged through a dry stream bed and carried running water uphill for 6 days. The last major incident occurred in 2009, when satellite imagery showed East Basin 12 miles east of its previous working limit. An environmental study commissioned under a false watershed restoration project found that the soil chemistry in the emergent basin matched samples collected from 4 separate mountain ranges. The trees were more difficult. Their growth rings contained fire scars from years when no common fire had burned across those ranges. Some rings were wider on the northern side of the trunks, as though sunlight had come predominantly from the south for several decades, then reversed. The study was withdrawn. Its authors were reassigned to an office called the Directorate for Reference Landscapes. That office did not appear in federal budget reports, but its travel and staffing costs were distributed among park units across the West. By then I understood why 14B appeared in every administrative system except maps. Budgets, rosters, fuel allocations, maintenance schedules, and radio plans were not incidental evidence. They were anchors. A place maintained through enough ordinary procedures acquires administrative weight. People expect patrols to occur, vehicles consume fuel, staff charge hours, equipment is purchased, supervisors sign reports. The bureaucracy did not merely conceal 14B. It helped keep the working limit in one district. That was why reports had to be filed even when no patrol occurred. That was why structures were maintained when they could not be reached. That was why staffing requirements remained constant through wars, shutdowns, reorganizations, and budget cuts. The institution was giving the route a consistent place in its own systems because physical geography would not. I retired in 2016. I left the handwritten ledger in the steel cabinet. I did not write a warning to my successor. I briefed her in person over 2 days and took her to the limestone survey pin. She listened without interruption. At the end, she asked the right question. What happens if the administrative anchors stop? I told her I did not know. That was not entirely true. The restricted land management directives contained one model prepared by the Land Baseline section. It predicted that if 14B lost its assigned patrols, budgets, and maintenance references, the working limit would cease adhering to the district. The model did not predict that the zone would disappear. It predicted relocation. 11. 5 years after I retired, I received a packet of updated land management maps from a former colleague. The maps were not classified. They were the internal operational additions used for fire planning, aviation, habitat management, and ranger deployment. I opened the district sheet first. Zone 14B was gone. The working limit did not appear on the restricted overlay. The aerial reconciliation values had been removed. The helicopter avoidance coordinates were absent. The second drainage had been corrected into a single ordinary watershed. I checked the supporting documents. There were no patrol schedules, no fuel allocations, no maintenance budgets, no wildlife exceptions, no radio protocol. I searched the digital index using every historical designation I knew. The results came back empty. For the first time in more than a century, the agency's records agreed that 14B had never existed. I considered calling my successor. I did not need to. At the bottom of the packet was the following year's Ranger deployment report for a district in another part of Montana. A new assignment appeared beneath the ordinary patrol rotations. Management Zone, 15-. See staffing, 2 field personnel, 1 dispatch liaison. Vehicle allocation, 1 patrol frequency, weekly, variable interval, objective, maintain perimeter integrity. Civilian entry remains 0. The coordinates were different. The staffing requirements were identical. 1 coordinate lay near a popular trail system I had hiked years earlier. The public map showed no closure, no administrative parcel, and no unusual terrain. It showed only a large blank stretch between 2 named valleys. I no longer see those blank spaces on wilderness maps as country nobody has entered. I see the places where an entrance has not yet decided to come out.